The rain had been falling for 3 hours straight, and David Chen was exhausted. His black sedan moved slowly through the downtown streets as he finally left the office building where his tech company was headquartered. It was past 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night, and the board meeting had dragged on much longer than anyone expected. They'd been discussing the quarterly budget, new product launches, and expansion plans until his head felt like it might explode. David had built his company from nothing. 15 years ago, he was writing code in his tiny apartment, surviving on instant noodles and coffee. Now at 38, he employed over 200 people, and his company was worth millions. But nights like this reminded him why success often felt lonely, while other people were home with their families, having dinner and helping kids with homework. He was stuck in conference rooms talking about profit margins. The streets were nearly empty except for a few late-night workers heading home and the occasional taxi. David's mind was still spinning with numbers and deadlines when something caught his eye. At first, he thought it might be a pile of old clothes or garbage bags someone had left at the bus stop. But as his headlights swept across the scene, he realized what he was actually looking at made his stomach drop. There was a little girl curled up on the metal bench. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old. Her small body was pressed against the back of the bench, and she was using what looked like a torn school backpack as a makeshift pillow. The thin jacket she wore was definitely not enough for the cold October night, and David could see her shoulders shaking even from inside his warm car. He pulled over immediately, his heart pounding. David had never been married, never had children of his own. His whole life had been consumed by building his business, but seeing this tiny person alone in the cold triggered something deep inside him that he didn't even know existed. Every instinct told him to get out of the car and help her immediately. But then he stopped himself. David was a smart man, and he knew that approaching a scared child as a stranger in the middle of the night was not the right thing to do, no matter how good his intentions were. He sat in his car for a moment, engine running, trying to figure out the best way to handle this situation. The girl hadn't noticed his car yet. She seemed to be sleeping, though he could tell she was restless and cold. David pulled out his phone and dialed 911. When the operator answered, he spoke quietly, but urgently. "Hi, I'm calling to report a child who appears to be alone at a bus stop downtown. She looks like she might be homeless or lost. I'm at the corner of 5th and Main Street. The child appears to be sleeping on the bench and she's very young, maybe 7 or 8 years old." The operator asked him several questions. Was the child injured? Did she appear to be in immediate danger? Was anyone else around? David answered as best he could while keeping his eyes on the little girl. He gave them his name and phone number, and they assured him that officers would be there within 10 minutes. While he waited, David stayed in his car but kept watch. He turned on his hazard lights to make sure other drivers would see his car and slow down. The bus stop was in a relatively safe part of downtown, but it was still no place for a child to spend the night alone. David found himself wondering how long she had been there. Had she eaten anything today? Where were her parents? As the minutes ticked by, David's mind raced with questions and emotions he wasn't used to feeling. He thought about his own childhood. His parents had worked hard to give him and his sister everything they needed. They weren't rich, but they were never hungry or homeless. David had taken that security for granted until this moment. The girl stirred on the bench, and for a second, David thought she might wake up. In the streetlight, he could see her face more clearly. She had dark hair that was tangled and messy, and her clothes looked like they hadn't been washed in days. There was something heartbreaking about how small she looked against the large metal bench. It reminded David of seeing a tiny bird that had fallen from its nest. David checked his phone. The police should be arriving any minute. He hoped they would handle the situation with care. The last thing this little girl needed was to be more frightened than she already was. He wondered if she would be scared when the officers woke her up. Would she run? Would she cry? Just then, David saw the police car approaching slowly with its lights off. The officers were being thoughtful about not startling the child with sirens or bright flashing lights. David felt relieved that they seemed to understand this was a delicate situation. A female officer got out of the passenger side of the patrol car. She was probably in her 30s with short brown hair and a kind face. She moved slowly and carefully toward the bench. Her partner, a taller man with gray hair, stayed back near the car, giving her space to approach the child gently. David watched as the officer knelt down beside the bench and spoke softly to the little girl. He couldn't hear what she was saying, but her body language was calm and reassuring. The child woke up and seemed startled at first, but the officer continued talking in what appeared to be a soothing voice. From his car, David could see the conversation unfolding. The little girl sat up on the bench looking confused and scared. The officer offered her something, maybe a bottle of water or a snack from the car. The child accepted it gratefully, which made David realize she was probably hungry as well as cold. The second officer approached slowly and handed his partner what looked like a blanket. They wrapped it around the little girl's shoulders and David saw her relax slightly. The officers continued talking with her, and gradually the child began to respond to their questions. David felt a mix of relief and sadness watching the scene. Relief because the child was now safe and in good hands. Sadness because he realized this little girl's night was far from over. She would probably end up in some kind of temporary care facility, at least until they could figure out her situation and locate her family. As the officers helped the child into the patrol car, the female officer looked around and noticed David's car with the hazard lights. She walked over to his window and he rolled it down. "Are you the gentleman who called this in?" she asked. "Yes, I am," David replied. "Is she going to be okay?" The officer nodded. "Thanks for calling us instead of approaching her yourself. A lot of people mean well, but it's always better to let trained professionals handle these situations. We're going to take her somewhere safe and warm, and we'll work on figuring out how she ended up here." David felt a strange urge to ask more questions, to somehow stay involved in helping this child, but he knew the officer was right. He had done the responsible thing by calling for help instead of trying to handle it himself. "Is there anything else I can do?" he asked. The officer handed him a business card. "If you're interested in helping kids like this one, you could contact our family services coordinator tomorrow. There are always ways for community members to get involved through proper channels." As the patrol car drove away with the little girl safely inside, David sat alone in his car, staring at the empty bus stop. The rain had stopped, but the bench was still wet and shining under the streetlight. 20 minutes ago, that bench had held a child with nowhere else to go. Now it was just an empty piece of metal again. But David knew that image would stay with him forever. Something had changed inside him tonight. Something he couldn't quite put into words yet. He looked at the business card the officer had given him and made a decision that would alter the course of his life in ways he couldn't imagine. David couldn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the little girl's face under the streetlight, her small body shivering on that cold metal bench. He kept wondering if she was warm now, if she was safe, if she was scared. By 6 in the morning, he gave up trying to sleep and made coffee instead. The business card from Officer Rodriguez sat on his kitchen counter where he'd placed it the night before. David picked it up and read it again. "Contact Family Services Coordinator," she had said. There are always ways for community members to get involved through proper channels. David had never thought much about kids in need before last night. His world revolved around profit margins, product launches, and board meetings. But something about seeing that child alone had cracked something open inside him. He couldn't just go back to his normal routine and pretend it never happened. At 8 o'clock sharp, David called the number on the card. A woman answered with a professional but warm voice. "Family Services Department, this is Ms. Kim speaking." "Hi, this is David Chen. I called police last night about a child I found at a bus stop downtown. Officer Rodriguez gave me this number and said I could contact you about ways to help." There was a pause, and David heard papers shuffling. "Oh yes, I have the report right here. Thank you for calling that in, Mr. Chen. That was exactly the right thing to do. Are you interested in learning about volunteer opportunities? Actually, I was wondering about that specific child. Is she okay? Is there anything she needs?" David felt awkward asking. He wasn't sure what was appropriate or even allowed. Ms. Kim's voice became more careful. "I can't share specific details about any child's case, as I'm sure you understand. But I can tell you that she's safe and we're working on her situation. If you're genuinely interested in helping, why don't you come in today? I can explain how our system works and what kinds of support we're always looking for." David canceled his morning meetings and drove to the Family Services building. It was an older brick building downtown, not far from where he'd found the girl the night before. The waiting room had worn carpet and plastic chairs, but the walls were covered with children's artwork and photos of happy families. David felt out of place in his expensive suit. Ms. Kim turned out to be a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She led him to a small office filled with files and family photos. "So tell me, Mr. Chen, what made you want to get involved?" David found himself telling her about the night before in more detail than he'd planned. How he'd been leaving another late meeting, feeling tired and disconnected from the world. How seeing that little girl had hit him like a punch to the stomach. How he'd sat in his car afterward, unable to stop thinking about what her life must be like. "That's a very human response," Ms. Kim said gently. "A lot of people want to help when they see a child in need. The trick is channeling that urge in ways that actually make a difference." She explained how the system worked. When police brought in a child like the one David had found, their first priority was immediate safety and medical care. Then came the detective work, figuring out the child's identity, locating family members, understanding what had led to the situation. "In this case," Ms. Kim said carefully, "we were able to identify the child quickly. Her name is Zoe, and she's 8 years old. She's not from a neglectful home. Quite the opposite, actually. Sometimes good families just hit impossible situations." David leaned forward. "What kind of situation?" Ms. Kim seemed to consider how much she could share. Zoe had been living with her grandmother while her mother worked out of state. The grandmother became seriously ill and was hospitalized suddenly. Zoe was scared and didn't know who to call for help, so she just wandered. She'd been sleeping at that bus stop for 2 nights before you found her. David felt his chest tighten. 2 nights. This little girl had been alone and scared for 2 whole nights while he'd been in board meetings and business dinners, completely unaware that someone so small was struggling just a few blocks away. "Where is she now?" he asked. "She's in temporary foster care with a family that specializes in emergency placements. They're wonderful people who understand that Zoe's situation is temporary." Ms. Kim paused. "The thing is, Mr. Chen, cases like this aren't really about bad parents or broken homes. They're about families who need support systems that don't exist," she explained further. Zoe's mother, Patricia, was a single parent who had taken a job in another state because it paid twice what she could earn locally. The plan had been for Zoe to stay with her grandmother for a few months while Patricia saved money and found them a place to live together in the new city. It should have worked, but grandmother Helen had suffered a stroke. She was recovering, but slowly, and she needed care herself now. Patricia was stuck 3 states away, afraid to leave her new job because her family desperately needed the income, but also desperate to get back to her daughter. "So what happens now?" David asked. "Well, that's complicated," Ms. Kim admitted. "Patricia is trying to find a way to come back, but she can't afford to lose this job. Grandmother Helen will eventually recover enough to care for Zoe again, but that could take months. In the meantime, Zoe is in limbo." David sat quietly for a moment, processing this information. What would help? I mean, hypothetically, if someone wanted to make a difference in a situation like this, what would actually help? Ms. Kim smiled. "That's a much better question than most people ask. Usually people want to adopt the child immediately or invite them to live in their house. That comes from a good place, but it's not what these families need." She pulled out a file and opened it. "What families like Zoe's need is support to stay together. Maybe Patricia needs help with travel costs to come back and visit Zoe. Maybe she needs job placement assistance so she can find work here instead of 3 states away. Maybe grandmother Helen needs medical bill assistance so Patricia doesn't have to choose between her job and her family." David nodded slowly. This made sense to him in a way that felt familiar. In business, he'd learned to look at systemic problems and find leverage points, places where a small intervention could create big changes. "Is it legal for private citizens to help with things like that?" he asked. "Absolutely, as long as it's done transparently and in coordination with our office," Ms. Kim said. "We actually prefer it when community members want to address root causes instead of just symptoms. It's much more effective." She told him about other cases where community support had made all the difference. A father who needed a reliable car to keep his job so his kids wouldn't end up in foster care. A mother who needed childcare assistance while she attended nursing school. Small interventions that prevented family separations. "The thing is," Ms. Kim continued, "most people who want to help don't have the resources to make that kind of difference. And most people who have resources don't know these situations exist." David felt something clicking into place in his mind. What if someone did have resources? What would be the most effective way to help? Ms. Kim studied his face carefully. Can I ask what kind of resources you're thinking about? David hesitated, then decided to be direct. I own a tech company. We do well financially. If I wanted to help families like Zoe's stay together, what would have the biggest impact? Ms. Kim's eyes widened slightly, but her voice stayed professional. Well, there are several approaches. You could fund emergency assistance for specific families. You could support job placement programs. You could help with medical bills or housing assistance. She paused. Or you could think bigger. Bigger how? What if there was a fund specifically for family reunification? Something that could step in quickly when good families hit temporary crises? Most of the family separations we see are preventable with the right support at the right time. David found himself thinking like a CEO again, but in a completely new context. How many families are we talking about? What would it cost to make a real difference? Ms. Kim pulled out another file. In our county alone, we see about 50 cases per year where families separate due to economic crisis rather than abuse or neglect. The average cost to keep a family together is about $3,000. Help with rent, medical bills, job training, things like that. Compare that to the cost of foster care, which runs about $60,000 per child per year. The numbers were stark. David could help 50 families stay together for the cost of supporting one child in foster care. It wasn't just morally right. It was economically logical. What about Zoe specifically? David asked. What would it take to get her family back together? Ms. Kim looked at her files again. Patricia needs to find comparable work here so she can move back. That might require job placement assistance or training. Grandmother Helen needs ongoing medical support, which means either insurance help or direct medical bill assistance. They need stable housing that works for both an adult and a child, and an elderly person with mobility issues. David was already thinking about his business network. He knew people in recruiting, people in healthcare, people in real estate. Is it possible for me to help with Zoe's specific situation? Possibly, Ms. Kim said carefully. But it would need to be done properly with oversight and transparency. And you'd need to understand that this isn't about you becoming part of their family. It's about empowering their family to stay together. David nodded. I understand. I'm not looking to be anyone's savior. I just want to help if I can. Ms. Kim smiled. Then let's talk about how to do this right. David woke up before his alarm for the second day in a row. His mind was already racing with ideas and possibilities. After his meeting with Ms. Kim yesterday, he'd spent the entire evening researching family services, foster care systems, and emergency assistance programs. What he'd learned had both shocked and motivated him. The statistics were staggering. Thousands of children entered foster care every year, not because their parents were unfit, but because their families faced temporary financial crises, medical emergencies, job loss, housing instability, situations that could be resolved with the right support at the right time. Yet the system seemed designed to separate families first and ask questions later. David had built his company by identifying problems and creating solutions. Now he was looking at the biggest problem he'd ever encountered, and for the first time in years, he felt truly excited about a challenge. He arrived at his office by 7 a.m, 2 hours before his usual time. His assistant, Jennifer, looked surprised to see him. You're here early today, Mr. Chen. Is everything all right? Actually, everything's more than all right, David said, feeling energized in a way he hadn't experienced in months. Can you clear my schedule for today? I need to make some important calls. Jennifer raised an eyebrow but nodded. She'd worked for David for 5 years and had never seen him cancel meetings to make personal calls. Should I reschedule the Johnson presentation? Yes, and the budget review too. This is more important. David headed to his office, already pulling out his phone. His first call was to Tom Rodriguez, his oldest friend and the CEO of a major recruiting firm in the city. They'd known each other since college, and Tom owed David a favor from when David had helped him land several tech contracts. Tom, it's David. I need your help with something unusual. Sure, what's up? You looking to poach someone from my clients? Tom laughed. Actually, I need you to find a job for someone. A single mother with retail management experience who needs to relocate back here from Denver. It needs to pay at least $40,000 a year and offer health benefits. There was a pause. David, you know I usually work with executives in high-level positions. Retail management isn't really my. Tom, this is important to me. Really important. I'm not asking you to do it for free. I'll pay your usual fee, but I need someone who can make this happen quickly. Tom's voice became more serious. Okay, you've got my attention. What's this about? David found himself telling Tom about Zoe, about the night at the bus stop, about learning how families got separated by circumstances beyond their control. Tom listened without interrupting. So you want to help this kid's mom come home? Tom asked when David finished. I want to help keep families together, David corrected, starting with this one. All right, send me her resume and details. I'll make some calls today. David's next call was to his lawyer, Mrs. Washington, who handled both his personal and business legal affairs. She was a sharp woman in her 60s who never sugarcoated anything. David, what you're describing sounds wonderful in theory, but there are liability issues to consider, she said after he explained his plans. If you're going to provide financial assistance to families, you need to do it through proper legal channels. What kind of channels? Ideally, you'd set up a charitable foundation. That gives you tax benefits and protects you legally. But that takes time. We're talking weeks or months to get everything properly established. David felt his momentum slowing. What about helping just this one family right now? You could make direct donations through the Family Services Department. They can accept funds on behalf of specific families and distribute them appropriately. It's transparent and keeps you protected. David made notes as she talked. How much can I donate without triggering any issues? For direct family assistance, the sky's the limit as long as it's properly documented and goes through official channels. But David, Mrs. Washington's voice carried a warning tone. Make sure you're doing this for the right reasons. Helping people is admirable, but don't let emotions drive you into something you'll regret. This isn't emotional, David said, though. Even as he said it, he wondered if that was entirely true. It's logical. The numbers make sense. After hanging up, David called Ms. Kim back. I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday. I'd like to help with Zoe's situation specifically, and I want to do it right. I'm glad to hear that, Mr. Chen. What did you have in mind? I have a recruiting contact who might be able to help Zoe's mother find work here. I also want to discuss covering any medical expenses for the grandmother that insurance doesn't handle. And if they need help with housing or moving costs, I'd like to contribute to that too. Ms. Kim was quiet for a moment. Mr. Chen, that's very generous, but I need to ask, what do you expect in return? The question caught David off guard. Nothing. I don't expect anything in return. Are you sure? A lot of people who offer this kind of help have expectations, even if they don't realize it. They want updates, they want to meet the family, they want to be involved in decisions. That's not healthy for anyone involved. David considered this carefully. Did he want to meet Zoe? Part of him was curious about the little girl whose situation had changed his perspective so dramatically, but he realized that his curiosity wasn't what mattered here. I understand, he said finally. I want to help, but I don't need to be involved in their personal lives. I just want the family to be together and stable. Good answer, Ms. Kim said, and David could hear the approval in her voice. Let me talk to Patricia, that's Zoe's mother, and see if she's open to accepting this kind of assistance. Some people are proud and don't want help, even when they need it. I understand that too. If she's not comfortable with it, I'll respect that decision. After ending the call, David realized he needed to think bigger. Helping one family was important, but Ms. Kim had mentioned 50 families per year in their county alone. What about other counties? What about other states? He called his accountant next. Robert, I want to set up a charitable foundation. How quickly can we make that happen? Robert Chen, no relation despite the shared last name, had been handling David's finances for 8 years. A full foundation with 501c3 status takes months, David. But if you want to start making charitable donations immediately, there are faster options. Such as, you could establish a donor-advised fund through an existing organization. It's like having your own foundation, but without all the paperwork and waiting. You can start making grants immediately. David liked the sound of that. Set it up. I want to start with $100,000. 100,000? Robert's voice climbed an octave. David, that's a significant charitable commitment. Are you sure about this? David looked out his office window at the city below. Somewhere out there, Zoe was in a foster home, missing her mother and worrying about her grandmother. Somewhere else, Patricia was working double shifts and crying herself to sleep, wondering if she'd ever get her daughter back, and they weren't the only ones. I'm sure, David said. And Robert, I think 100,000 is just the beginning. His next call was to his business partner and co-founder, Alex Kim. They'd started the company together, and Alex was the closest thing David had to family in the city. Alex, I need to tell you about something that's been happening the last couple of days. David explained everything. Finding Zoe, meeting with family services, learning about how many families faced similar crises. Alex listened thoughtfully. So you want to start a foundation to help keep families together? Alex asked when David finished. Exactly. And I was wondering if you'd be interested in getting involved. Not financially. I can handle the funding. But maybe helping with strategy, operations, that kind of thing. Alex was quiet for a long moment. David, in all the years I've known you, I've never seen you get passionate about anything except work. This is different. You think I'm making a mistake? Actually, I think this might be the best idea you've ever had. Count me in. David felt a surge of relief. Having Alex's support meant everything. They'd built one successful organization together. Maybe they could build another one that mattered even more. By noon, David had made a dozen more calls. He'd contacted a real estate agent friend about finding accessible housing for families with elderly members. He'd spoken with his insurance broker about covering medical expenses for people without adequate coverage. He'd even called his old college roommate, who now ran a medical clinic, asking about providing free healthcare services. Each conversation built on the last. David was creating a network of resources that could respond quickly when families faced crises. It wasn't just about money, though money was important. It was about having the right people in place to solve problems before they became disasters. Ms. Kim called him back in the afternoon. I spoke with Patricia. She was hesitant at first. She's very independent and doesn't like accepting charity. But when I explained that this wasn't charity so much as community support, and that it was about keeping her family together, she agreed to consider it. What does she need specifically? Your recruiting friend already called her. There are 3 potential positions here that would work for her schedule and pay scale. She's interviewing by phone tomorrow. David felt his heart speed up. That was fast. Tom Rodriguez doesn't mess around when he's motivated, Ms. Kim said with a laugh. He told me you'd convinced him this was the most important job placement he'd ever work on. They discussed the other logistics. Grandmother Helen's medical bills totaled about $12,000 beyond what insurance covered. The family would need help with moving costs and security deposits for a new apartment. Patricia would need to give 2 weeks' notice at her current job, which meant 2 weeks without income. Altogether, we're talking about maybe $25,000 to get this family completely stabilized, Ms. Kim said. $25,000. David spent more than that on his car payment and insurance each year. It seemed impossible that such a relatively small amount of money could make the difference between a family staying together or being separated indefinitely. Let's do it, David said without hesitation. Just like that? Just like that. What's the next step? As David hung up the phone, he realized that his entire life had changed direction in the space of 48 hours. 2 days ago, his biggest concern had been quarterly earnings reports. Now he was about to launch what might become the most important work he'd ever done. He looked at his calendar, full of canceled meetings and postponed presentations. None of it seemed important anymore. Tomorrow, he would start working on something that actually mattered. 3 days after David's phone marathon, things started, moving faster than he'd expected. Tom Rodriguez called him at 7 in the morning with news that made David nearly drop his coffee cup. David, you're not going to believe this. Patricia just aced her interview with Morrison Retail Group. They want to hire her as an assistant manager at their flagship store downtown. The pay is actually better than what we discussed. 45,000 plus benefits. David felt a rush of excitement mixed with disbelief. Are you serious? That fast? When I told them the situation, the hiring manager got personally involved. Turns out she's a single mother herself. She moved mountains to fast-track the process. Tom paused. Patricia can start in 2 weeks if she wants the job. David set down his coffee and grabbed a pen. What does she need to make that happen? Well, she needs to give notice at her current job, arrange for someone to drive her car back here, it's too old for a long road trip, and find a place to live. Oh, and she's worried about the gap in pay between jobs. David was already making notes. The pay gap isn't a problem. What about housing? That's the tricky part. She needs a place that works for her, Zoe, and grandmother Helen when she gets out of the rehabilitation center. Helen uses a walker now, so they need ground floor or elevator access, and it has to be affordable on a retail manager's salary. After hanging up with Tom, David called his real estate contact, Michelle Torres. Michelle had helped him buy his condo 3 years ago and knew the rental market inside and out. Michelle, I need your help finding a family an apartment. 3 bedrooms, ground floor or elevator access, good neighborhood, and it needs to be available immediately. Michelle laughed. David, you know that's like asking for a unicorn, right? Good accessible housing doesn't just sit empty in this city. What if money wasn't the issue for the first few months? What if someone could cover a higher deposit or the first few months of rent to secure the right place? Well, that changes things, Michelle said, her voice becoming more serious. Let me make some calls. How much are we talking about? David thought about his conversation with Ms. Kim about total costs. Whatever it takes. Within reason. That afternoon, Michelle called back with 3 options. The best one was a newly renovated ground floor apartment in a safe neighborhood near good schools. The landlord was asking for first and last month's rent plus a security deposit, about $4,500 up front. The monthly rent was $1,200, which was manageable on Patricia's new salary. There's a waiting list, Michelle explained, but the landlord is willing to hold it if someone can put down the deposit today. David didn't hesitate. Do it. While Michelle handled the housing, David tackled the medical bills. Grandmother Helen's stroke had left the family with thousands of dollars in hospital bills, rehabilitation costs, and ongoing therapy expenses. Insurance covered most of it, but the remaining $12,000 might as well have been $12 million for a family already struggling financially. David met with the hospital's financial counselor, Mrs. Patterson, a tired-looking woman who seemed surprised to see someone in an expensive suit asking about someone else's medical debt. Mr. Chen, I have to ask, what's your relationship to the patient? I'm a community member who wants to help, David said simply. Is it possible for a third party to pay off medical debt? Mrs. Patterson nodded slowly. It happens sometimes. Usually it's family members or occasionally churches or charities. We just need proper documentation and approval from the patient. What kind of documentation? The patient has to sign a release allowing us to discuss their account with you, and we need verification that the payment is legitimate, basically proof that the money isn't stolen or part of some kind of fraud. David pulled out his business card. Would a bank cashier's check from my business account work? Mrs. Patterson looked at the card, then at David, then back at the card. Her whole demeanor changed. Mr. Chen, you're the CEO of TechFlow Solutions? Yes, I am. My son works in your customer service department. He loves that job. Says it's the first place he's worked where management actually cares about employees. She smiled for the first time since David had arrived. If you're vouching for this payment, that's good enough for me. The next challenge was transportation. Patricia's 15-year-old Honda had over 200,000 miles on it, and probably wouldn't survive the drive from Denver to their city. Even if it did make the trip, it would likely break down soon after, leaving Patricia without reliable transportation to her new job. David found himself in unfamiliar territory. He'd never bought a used car in his life. His vehicles came from dealerships with warranties and service contracts. So he called his mechanic, Roberto Valdez, who had been maintaining David's cars for years. Roberto, I need your help buying a reliable used car for someone, something safe and dependable, probably around $10,000. You buying a car for someone else? That's new for you, Mr. Chen. David explained the situation. Roberto listened thoughtfully, then made a suggestion that surprised David. You know what? My cousin runs a small dealership across town. Good, honest guy. Let me call him and see what he's got. For $10,000, we should be able to find something really solid. Maybe 3 or 4 years old with low miles. 2 hours later, David found himself standing in a small car lot, looking at a silver Honda Civic that Roberto's cousin, Fernando, was praising enthusiastically. "This car is perfect for what you described," Fernando said. 2019 model, 38,000 miles, one owner who was an elderly lady. She only drove it to church and the grocery store. David knew nothing about cars beyond how to drive them, but Roberto had taught him what to look for. The interior was spotless, the engine sounded smooth, and the maintenance records showed regular oil changes and proper care. "How much?" David asked. "For you, because Roberto vouched for you and because this is for a good cause?" $9,500. I'll throw in a 6-month warranty too." David pulled out his checkbook. It felt surreal, buying a car for someone he'd never met to help reunite a family he'd discovered by accident. But it also felt like the most important purchase he'd ever made. While David was arranging practical matters, Ms. Kim was working on the emotional side of the reunion. She'd been having daily phone calls with Patricia, who was overwhelmed by the sudden change in her family's circumstances. "She's grateful but also scared," Ms. Kim told David during one of their check-in calls. "This is happening so fast and she's not used to accepting help. She keeps asking what the catch is." "There is no catch," David said. "I just want her family to be together. I believe you, but she doesn't know you. From her perspective, stranger danger is a real thing. Rich people don't usually help working-class families without wanting something in return." David hadn't considered that his help might be frightening rather than reassuring. "What can I do to make her more comfortable?" "Keep doing exactly what you're doing, working through me and the official channels. Don't try to contact her directly. Don't ask to meet Zoe, just let the help speak for itself." The timeline was tight. Patricia needed to give 2 weeks' notice at her Denver job, which she'd already done. The apartment would be available in 10 days. Grandmother Helen was scheduled to be discharged from the rehabilitation center in 2 weeks. Everything had to come together perfectly, or the family would end up scattered again. David found himself checking his phone constantly for updates. Tom called with news about Patricia's background check clearing. Michelle texted about the apartment being ready ahead of schedule. Roberto sent photos of the Honda after Fernando's team had detailed it until it looked almost new. But the most important call came from Ms. Kim on a Friday afternoon. "David, I just got off the phone with Patricia. She's ready to come home." "When?" "Tomorrow. She's driving here with just a suitcase and her personal items. The moving truck with their furniture won't arrive until next week, but she wants to see Zoe as soon as possible." David felt his heart rate increase. "Is Zoe ready?" "Zoe has been asking about her mom every day since she was placed in foster care. Her caseworker says she's been packed and ready to go for a week." That evening, David sat in his condo looking out at the city lights. In less than 24 hours, a family that had been separated by circumstances beyond their control would be together again. A little girl who'd been sleeping on a bus stop bench would be back in her mother's arms. But David realized this was just the beginning. He'd helped one family, but Ms. Kim had mentioned 50 families per year in their county alone. How many Zoes were out there right now, scared and alone because their families had hit temporary rough patches? He picked up his laptop and started typing. If he was going to do this right, he needed a real plan, not just random acts of kindness, but a systematic approach to keeping families together. He needed policies, procedures, and partnerships with social services, medical providers, employers, and housing authorities. By midnight, David had outlined what would eventually become the Family Stability Initiative, a comprehensive program designed to provide emergency support to families facing temporary crises. The goal wasn't to replace government services, but to fill in the gaps, to respond quickly when families needed help most. But that was tomorrow's work. Tonight, he was just a man who'd found a little girl at a bus stop and decided to do something about it. Tomorrow, that little girl would be going home. David closed his laptop and went to bed, feeling something he hadn't experienced in years: the satisfaction of knowing his work truly mattered. Saturday morning arrived gray and drizzly, but David woke up feeling like the sun was shining. Today was reunion day. Patricia had driven through the night and was already in the city. Ms. Kim had called at 7 to confirm that everything was ready. David wanted to be there for the reunion, but he knew it wasn't his place. This was a private family moment, not a photo opportunity or a chance for him to feel good about his charitable work. Instead, he spent the morning at his office trying to focus on emails while his mind kept wandering to a little girl who was about to see her mother again. Ms. Kim called at 11:30. "It's done, David. Patricia and Zoe are together. How did it go?" "About like you'd expect. Lots of tears, lots of hugging. Zoe didn't want to let go of her mom for about 20 minutes. Ms. Kim's voice was warm with emotion. Patricia kept thanking everyone over and over. "She's overwhelmed but happy." David felt a tightness in his throat that surprised him. "Are they at the apartment?" "We're heading there now. The furniture truck arrived this morning, so Patricia can start making it feel like home." "Oh, and David, she asked me to thank you specifically. She said she doesn't understand why a stranger would help her family, but she's grateful beyond words." After hanging up, David sat in his office chair staring out the window. 3 weeks ago, he'd been a successful but disconnected CEO whose biggest concern was quarterly profits. Now he'd helped reunite a family and felt more fulfilled than any business deal had ever made him feel. But he wasn't done. This was just the beginning. David spent the next several weeks working with lawyers, accountants, and social workers to establish the Family Stability Initiative officially. He started with a modest budget of $500,000, enough to help about 20 families facing crisis situations. The goal was simple: provide immediate practical support to keep families together during temporary emergencies. The program launched quietly 6 months later. David insisted on working behind the scenes, letting social workers and family counselors be the public face of the initiative. He didn't want recognition or media attention. He just wanted families to stay together. Meanwhile, Patricia settled into her new job and exceeded everyone's expectations. Her district manager told Tom Rodriguez that she was the best hire they'd made in years. Zoe enrolled in a local elementary school and quickly made friends. Her teacher, Mrs. Lopez, mentioned to Patricia that Zoe was a remarkably resilient child who showed unusual empathy for classmates facing difficulties. The biggest challenge came when grandmother Helen was ready to leave the rehabilitation center. She'd made good progress but still needed assistance with daily activities. Patricia worried about managing her job, caring for Zoe, and helping her grandmother all at the same time. Ms. Kim called David about the situation. They need help arranging home health care for Helen, but Patricia's insurance doesn't cover enough hours. She's thinking about quitting her job to care for her grandmother full-time. That would defeat everything we've accomplished, David said immediately. What would solve the problem? About 20 hours per week of professional home care assistance. That would cover the times when Patricia is at work and Zoe is at school. But it costs about $800 per month. David didn't hesitate. Let's cover it for the first year. By then, hopefully Helen will be more independent, or Patricia will have been promoted and can afford it herself. 8 months after the reunion, David received an unexpected package at his office. Inside was a handmade card covered in crayon drawings of flowers and rainbows. The message, written in careful third-grade handwriting, said, "Thank you for helping my family stay together. Love, Zoe." Ms. Kim had included a note explaining that Zoe had insisted on making the card after learning that a nice man had helped bring her mother home. Patricia had agreed to let Zoe send it, but requested that David not respond directly to maintain appropriate boundaries. David kept the card on his desk, and it became his daily reminder of why the Family Stability Initiative mattered. The program grew slowly but steadily. Word spread through social services networks about the fund that could respond quickly when families faced emergencies. David hired a full-time coordinator, Dr. Rachel Thompson, a former social worker with 20 years of experience in family services. Dr. Thompson proved to be exactly what the program needed. She developed screening procedures to identify families who could benefit most from assistance, created partnerships with local hospitals, schools, and employers, and established follow-up protocols to ensure families remain stable after receiving help. The key, Dr. Thompson explained to David during one of their monthly meetings, is catching families before they hit rock bottom. Once children enter foster care or families become homeless, it's much harder and more expensive to put things back together. The numbers proved her point. In its first year, the Family Stability Initiative helped 43 families avoid separation. The average cost per family was $3,200. Compare that to the annual cost of foster care, over $60,000 per child. And the program wasn't just morally right, it was economically smart. David began receiving requests from other cities to replicate the program. Social workers in Chicago, Atlanta, and Phoenix wanted to know how to set up similar initiatives in their communities. David worked with Dr. Thompson to create a handbook that other communities could use to establish their own family stability programs. 2 years after finding Zoe at the bus stop, David was invited to speak at a national conference on family services. He almost declined. Public speaking wasn't his favorite activity, and he preferred working behind the scenes. But Dr. Thompson convinced him that sharing their story could help thousands more families. The conference was held in Washington, D.C., and David found himself standing before an audience of social workers, family counselors, and child welfare advocates from across the country. He told them about that rainy night when he'd found a little girl sleeping at a bus stop, and how that encounter had changed his perspective on what success really meant. "I thought success was measured in profit margins and stock prices," David said. "But real success is measured in families that stay together, children who sleep safely in their own beds, and communities that take care of each other." The response was overwhelming. David received hundreds of emails from people wanting to start similar programs in their communities. Some were social workers with limited resources but unlimited dedication. Others were business leaders who had never considered using their success to address social problems. David worked with his team to create a network of family stability initiatives across the country. Each program was locally managed but followed the same basic principles: respond quickly, work through official channels, address root causes rather than symptoms, and measure success by families staying together. 3 years after the program began, David received another unexpected communication. This time it was a phone call from Patricia. "Mr. Chen," she said, her voice nervous but determined. "I hope it's okay that I'm calling you directly. Ms. Kim gave me your number and said it would be appropriate now." "Of course," David said, genuinely pleased to hear from her. "How are you and Zoe doing?" "We're doing wonderfully, thanks to you. But that's not why I'm calling." Patricia paused. "I've been promoted to district manager and my salary has increased significantly. I want to give back to the program that saved my family." David was surprised. "Patricia, you don't owe us anything. The program exists to help families, not to create obligations. I understand that. But I also understand what it feels like to have nowhere to turn when your family is falling apart. I want to help other families the way you helped mine." Patricia became the program's first recipient turned donor, contributing both money and time to help other families in crisis. Her story inspired other families who had received assistance to give back when they were able. But the most meaningful update came from an unexpected source. Zoe, now in 5th grade, had written an essay for school about heroes. Her teacher sent a copy to Ms. Kim, who shared it with David. The essay was titled, "The Stranger Who Kept My Family Together." In it, Zoe wrote about the night she'd been scared and alone, how the kind police officers had helped her, and how a man I never met had made it possible for her family to be together again. The essay concluded, "I don't know the man's name and I've never seen his face, but he taught me that sometimes heroes are just regular people who decide to help when they see someone in need. When I grow up, I want to be that kind of hero too." David read the essay 3 times, each time feeling more moved than the last. He realized that the ripple effects of that rainy night 3 years ago were still spreading. Zoe was learning that communities take care of each other. Patricia was giving back to help other families. Social workers across the country were implementing similar programs. 5 years after the Family Stability Initiative began, David looked at the program's impact report. They had helped over 800 families stay together, prevented thousands of children from entering foster care unnecessarily, and saved taxpayers millions of dollars in foster care and social services costs. But the numbers, impressive as they were, weren't what mattered most to David. What mattered was knowing that somewhere in the city, Zoe was doing her homework at her own kitchen table, with her mother helping with math problems and her grandmother telling stories about the old days. What mattered was that a family that could have been torn apart by circumstances beyond their control was instead growing stronger, together. David still worked long hours and still cared about his company's success. But now he had a different definition of what success meant. Success wasn't just building a profitable business. It was building a community where families didn't have to face crises alone. And it all started with a little girl sleeping at a bus stop and a stranger who decided to do the right thing.